place to check here. Okay, just a couple more minutes here before I start. If you are there, if you're listening and watching, if you wouldn't mind, I would appreciate just leaving me a quick comment to let me know that the audio is working and that I've got everything set up as it should be. As usual, I'm trying something something a little bit new. I've shifted things around a little bit, and I'm trying to stream simultaneously to both, actually 3 places, to Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and then also Twitch. So I'm kind of curious to see if I'm able to pull that off without any major problems. All right, I got a thumbs up from Becky. Thank you, Becky. Good. There's a bit of a delay between me talking and then I think the video showing up on the live broadcast. So it takes me a little bit to get your comments, but I think we're good to go. Okay, I'm going to close these things up a little bit. And Phyllis, good to see you. One of these days I'm going to have, I would like to have a way to get you guys on a call so I can have some interaction or live feedback. I think that would be awesome. I'm not sure. I might not be too far from that if I continue to mess around with this stuff. All right, it is 11 o'clock, so I'm good to go. I think everything is hooked up correctly, and I'm going to get started. All right, and I'm going to switch over to Photoshop here. All right, so this is a live critique, and I do this every Thursday at 11 a.m. Try to keep it under an hour. So far, I've been doing just, it seems like 2 images. With how chatty I get, it tends to take me about that long. I wouldn't mind doing more than that if more were submitted. I've gotten some emails and communications from some of you, or some people that you're a little bit shy to show your work in this context, and I appreciate that. I understand how intimidating that can be to put your work up on a wall especially in front of an audience that you might not know. That being said, I think I'm a pretty considerate critiquer. I don't think I'm too intense or critical in bad ways or mean ways. And I really do think that critique is one of the most important ways for us to learn, to do something, our own work, and then have other people talk about it, right? That's the only way, the feedback mechanism, or the best feedback mechanism that we have to really see what's working, what we're actually communicating, if what we intend is actually what happens in terms of what our audience receives. And it's really a valuable tool. So I hope, even if you're uncomfortable with it, even if you don't think your work is good enough or deserves to be looked at and critiqued in a serious manner, I hope you overcome that. I welcome all experience levels. I think we all have stuff to learn from each other, no matter where we're at in our development as artists, right? I think even the most basic or beginning artist can teach something to an experienced artist, right? We can learn from each other at every stage. And I think it also benefits more experienced artists to be able to see maybe the development or early stages of development of an artist, because it I don't know, I think it helps us to see the kinds of problems or the kinds of hurdles that we are all dealing with, no matter what experience level we're at. Anyway, I think there's a lot of value, a lot of benefit from these critiques, and I would hope that even if you have that resistance or that shyness, that you'd be willing to send in an image and put it up on the wall, so to speak, get it critiqued. I think you'll be happy you did. I think there's a lot. And, there's something psychologically, I think, that happens when you put your work up on the wall, so to speak, or you put it up in front of people. There's a certain kind of psychological distance that you get. You become more of the audience than the creator in that situation. You can see from a different perspective, from another person's eyes, so to speak. So lots of different things that I think come from critiques. All right. So I'm going to switch over here to Photoshop, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the first image that I'm going to talk about today. So this is a combination of photograph and paint. This artist I know basically glued down this photographic image of a truck going down a road, glued it down on some surface, a board or canvas or something, and then started painting into the image in the background and around the periphery. There were some issues with the process of gluing this image down, which ended up not being a bad thing, right? I think the edges got broken up a little bit. She tore out little portions that maybe were rippling or didn't adhere as well as she'd like. But again, not necessarily a bad thing, right? Whenever we combine photographic imagery with painted imagery, there's going to be this tension between two very different kinds of visual communication. There is a kind of cool mechanical precision about a photographic image, right? There's a sense that there was a machine that did that. No human hand could be quite that precise or precise in that way. And then you get these very gestural, organic, splattery, textured marks of paint and collage. And there's going to be this tension between those two different visual languages. So one of the difficult things about working with collage, or whenever we're combining disparate visual languages like that, can be to find a way to transition from one to the other, or make them feel like they belong in the same image. And in this way, in this case, having that broken up edge on both sides and on the top helps us to transition from one to the other, helps us make sense of those two things together. There are a couple other things that she's done here that I think are very successful in terms of making those two very different visual languages combined in a successful way. One way that I think I've already mentioned to her, but I thought this was especially successful. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. She has this edge up here of the trees. Let me see if I can get that line a little bit more visible. So she has this edge of the trees in the distance, and it's right along the edge, and then it transitions into this blue sky. So that's believable, right? That's what we'd expect to see, is along this transition from this line of the top of the trees and then into the blue sky. But then we have this tree right here in the midground that passes over that line, that line that separates the photograph, or these trees, and the paint in the sky. It transgresses that line and goes up above that line into the sky. So why that's so significant, I think, is because it helps us, it creates a spatial relationship between what's the subject matter in the photograph and the subject matter that's being painted, right? So there's this sense that this tree is in front of these trees in the background and also in front of this sky. It creates this overlapping spatial relationship. This is in front, this is behind that, and then that's behind that, right? So just that little bit of overlapping, having this tree kind of come up and overlap both this background and the sky, implies a spatial relationship not just between the two elements in the photograph, but the photograph and the painted part of this image, right? So there are these little visual cues that we can give to imply a spatial relationship that can help us transition or make sense of what's happening when we're combining a photograph with painted imagery. There are some other ways that she's been able to accomplish this by bringing some of these lines of perspective out into, and hopefully let me get that a little bit more visible. So we've got these lines of perspective, the vanishing point going off here. I'm going to kind of bring some of these that she's brought out into the painted area. And let's do a couple more of these. Right? So bringing these perspective lines out into the painted area is also helping us to transition or find a relationship or kind of cross the barrier, I guess. There's kind of a visual barrier that happens when we've got these two different kinds of visual language. The continuing perspective lines from the painted area into the image help us to cross that barrier and make sense of these two parts together. So a lot of really great stuff happening here. And once we get those things to combine in an interesting way, in a believable way, in a cohesive way that doesn't feel like it's just like a photograph plopped on top of gestural paint, once we can create that transition or create that consistency or relationship between the two, I think that's one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. And she's done that really well here. I think maybe if I were to, let's go in here, there's this line of grass here, right? Happening right along there. And she kind of brings that and kind of fades it out into this smaller line right here with probably pen or pencil or charcoal. I think I would have probably maybe just let that continue a little bit longer to bring in, to kind of reinforce that hedge or that line of those trees kind of continuing on into the painted area. I think that would have might help kind of unite the two a little bit more, and maybe even just letting those marks fade off into something more abstract. So I'm going to bring some of these lighter greens in here to kind of bring, let's see, some of those colors in. Right, so even if these lines didn't really belong to a continuing hedge, but just tapped into that linear perspective line, I think that would help bridge that gap between photograph and the background and stitch those two parts of the images together. That's a fairly minor thing though, and I'm wishing now that I had done all this modification on a different layer because I am probably going to run out of undos. Oh goodness. Okay. So actually really quickly, I'm going to go back to revert and then I'm going to re-crop this. I should have done this to begin with. Give me just a second here, just so I can always have the option of looking at the original. I'm going to copy that layer and work on a duplicate instead of working on the original. Okay, so overall, I'm totally satisfied with the integration of the photograph and the and the more gestural kind of traditional kind of rendering and paint and collage and texture, I don't feel like there's distracting or bad tension or kind of dissonance between those two parts. I think you've integrated all the different collage elements really well. I think what I am looking at now is how you could. Well, I guess first, what is it you're communicating? What is this? What is the message here? What's the story here? How do you want us to read it? What do you want us to get from it? Are we meant to just kind of get this feeling of, going down the road on an average day, kind of sun shining and kind of a peaceful, serene feeling, blue skies, nice light. There's nothing overly dramatic. I mean, there's a lot of interesting texture happening in the sky and stuff, but there feels like there's a story here, right? And this truck going off into the distance, maybe there's something written on the truck. I don't think we have enough information here on this file to see if there's something written on the truck. But I get that you're leading us off into the distance. I get that there's kind of this truck. Maybe it's a moving truck. In fact, I think that's what it is, if I remember the background of this painting. But I feel like more could be done to give us some kind of payoff, right? To emphasize what it is that we're supposed to get from this image. And again, if you just want like kind of a peaceful feeling, a normal day truck going down the road, I think it's successful in that way. But couple things. So where is it the destination that this truck is going to? Is it the truck itself? Because it kind of feels like that's where my eye is being led to, just by the linear perspective, and all these arrows and patterns are kind of pointing me to this truck in the distance. And it's a fairly high contrast rectangle, white rectangle surrounded by a lot of dark values, and it's pretty much at the vanishing point, right? So this truck feels like it's important. You're leading us to that truck, which maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough of a payoff. We're following the truck. We're driving in a car behind this truck. I wonder if there's more that we could do to, I don't know, give where's the truck going? Is that important? Maybe let me do this. Let me grab a different tool here. So what if we started... Let me do this here. I'm making this up as I go, but what if we were to put this kind of red shape right there, and I'm going to deselect that, maybe make this layer a little bit more transparent. So there's that little punch of red in the distance. Maybe let me try changing the blend mode so it kind of mimics more what you might see with some kind of glaze or something like that. And maybe another kind of, I'm trying to do like these little pointy shapes, because pointy shapes are gonna kind of be more forceful. Maybe choose a slightly different color. Deselect, and I'll change that to, or actually maybe I'll just leave that normal. So maybe a more opaque shape there. So what I'm doing is I'm giving us these little high contrast little bits of saturated color, these reds that are going to push against the greens that you have in the trees and then here around here in the paint. And what that's doing is it's reinforcing this as a focal point, right? You're already leading us there, but these little bits of like strong, like sharp edge geometric shapes and strong colors, they're a little bit more of a payoff, right? They're a little bit more like you're leading us there, and you give us these little zaps of shape and color that might just just give a little bit more, again, just a little bit more of a payoff when we arrive at the place that you're leading us to. It also would, in this case, instead of getting us thinking about that truck as the focal point, getting us thinking about where the truck is headed, right? Kind of what's in front of the truck off in the distance. I'm not sure if that entirely is true. Let's see. I'm going to go back to that and back to my brush. And then maybe just kind of just some... what if I just did a little squiggly line up there? Or, maybe off to the side of the truck. And I'm going to do one more thing here and put just a little zip of bright green right up in there. I don't know if that brings in some of these light yellow greens in the painted areas, and also starts to push against some of the reds that I'm putting in there. Anyway, so I'm just testing things out. The luxury of being able to do this on Photoshop is I'm not messing with anything, and I can undo and redo as many times as I'd like. But the takeaway here that I'm hoping, and the point that I'm trying to make here, is that I think there's perhaps more you could do with emphasizing that this truck is going somewhere exciting, right? And maybe that's because I partially know what the story is behind this image, but I think the image is less about the truck itself and more about the truck going somewhere. So there are ways that we could visually pull the attention away from that rectangle, light rectangle of the truck, and put our attention instead on like the vanishing point where the truck is headed toward. Anyway, I think you could probably accomplish a similar thing, and I'm going to delete all that and delete that. There's perhaps a way to do that by just putting more color in this big tree, right? Maybe you could fill out more of that with some highlights and shadows and paint. And more saturated color. You could make other areas around the truck more saturated just with natural colors that would occur in the scene. Maybe this yellow could get increasingly intense as it gets closer to the truck. And then maybe the yellow could then... Let me see if I could do this real quick. I don't know if this would work or not. Maybe it would work better as like a collage element, but maybe that yellow, oh, I'm realizing what that's doing. Maybe that yellow could be repeated in front of the truck, off in the distance. I don't know if that would be strong enough. Let me see if I can get a slightly stronger. No, that's pretty saturated already. But like a saturated color that would continue that line in front of the truck. Again, it's kind of like getting us away from just focusing on that truck and maybe thinking more about the destination. Okay, enough of that. I think that's my point is probably made there. The other thing I was thinking is that what are ways that we could use the negative space to reinforce that focal point more? Like what's going on in the sky space. I feel like she's already doing that somewhat in that there's this area that's, let me get a better color, this white cloud over here that's sitting right there on that transition from the top of the trees into the sky that's lighter. So maybe that kind of helps draw our attention to this area of the image. Like I said earlier, having this tree poke up above there and overlap the sky is also helping bring our attention here to these elements in the distance. But I wonder if perhaps this is something I've done before. Let me do this real quick, if I can do it real quick. I'm going to do a radial gradient here. And then Let's see if I can do, no. There we go. Okay, so deselect. I'm going to show you what I just did. I made a layer that's got this this basically kind of like a spotlight that's pointing right here in the center. And I'm going to change that to a multiply layer and then adjust the opacity. So letting it get darker towards the outer edges, you know, this is in photography called vignetting, kind of letting it get darker towards the edges of the composition helps guide us in there. I don't know if that's the right answer here. Another thing that I can think of that might be successful is maybe even just, let's do this. Like having some paper elements in the sky that I'm going to choose this kind of blue color and do a fill. And then I'm going to do another layer here with another shape. With a different kind of blue. And I'm going to do a fill of that. Nope. Let's do that. And change that to a... Let's do that. Okay, so this is a little bit heavy-handed, and I'm not sure that this would be the right answer. But it would just be another way to go about this. I'm going to erase some of that blue along the line right there, and maybe soften this edge right along here. So that's not quite as strong a line. But maybe you could, and let me decrease the opacity of that. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted. But I could see you taking a little bit of masking tape, running it along, again, reinforcing these lines of perspective going off into the distance, using the sky, that overall sky shape, and introducing these lines that also point us towards that, toward that focal point in the distance. So again, thinking about how we could use all the negative space, all the other parts of the composition to reinforce the message of the image, reinforce what we're trying to get people to focus on, instead of just having it be kind of a static shape that's filled kind of consistently. And then the last thing here on this image would be an issue of just perspective. And I don't think this is necessarily a problem in this image, but it is something worth keeping track of. When we have, let me let's do this. No. Normal, default. There we go. Okay, so when we have a landscape, we've got this road and sky and trees, and everything is kind of going off to that vanishing point, right? This is linear perspective. Generally speaking, everything as we approach that horizon line where the vanishing point is disappearing, or the vanishing point is always going to exist on that horizon line, which also represents our eye level. As we get closer to that horizon line, all the parts or all the elements in our composition are going to be getting smaller, right? So if we have telephone poles, right, that are right next to the road, they're going to appear to be getting smaller and smaller as they get closer to the vanishing point, to the horizon line. Not only that, they're going to appear to be getting closer together, right? So the same thing is happening with clouds and colors in the sky. So as we get closer to the horizon line and vanishing point, clouds that are closer to that vanishing point are going to look smaller. These aren't very good clouds, but hopefully you kind of get the idea. Clouds are going to be, as they get closer to that horizon line, are going to be smaller. As they get closer to the top of the composition, further away from that horizon line, clouds are going to generally be bigger, right? And then in between those two areas, clouds are going to be medium sized, right? So they're going to gradually be getting smaller the closer they get to that vanishing point, to the horizon line, right? Could you have a really big cloud off in the distance and a really small cloud close to us, and that kind of changing that big and small thing? Yes, you could, and it happens. But generally speaking, this is what our eyes expect to see in a believable landscape, right? Things that are further away from the vanishing point are closer to us and going to appear bigger. Things that are closer to the vanishing point are going to be smaller. So how does this pertain to this image? Well, keep track of that in the sky area. Don't just distribute clouds the same size evenly across that blue sky area. Realize that that's also going to tap into our sense of space. The closer it is to the horizon line, or this vanishing point down at the bottom, let's see. The closer it is to the horizon line, the smaller those clouds are going to be. The closer it is to the top of the image, or further away it gets from the horizon line or vanishing point, the bigger those clouds are going to be. You can reflect that in the size of the collage elements that you're using. Even if they're not meant to evoke clouds, just the size of those shapes and dividing up the overall shape of the sky, you might want to just consider that, have that be part of the calculation, to not contradict what's happening or our expectations of what happens with linear perspective. All right, so I think that's probably enough for this image. A little bit more payoff at your focal point. Maybe less emphasis on the truck, more on where the truck is headed. A little bit of excitement down the road might help strengthen the message and give us more to kind of lock in on and engage with. And then some of using the negative space to reinforce focal point, and then these linear perspective issues perhaps in the sky. Across the board, though, I love this. I think you could leave it alone as is. There's plenty of really interesting textures and colors and collage elements. There's a lot of really fun stuff to engage with. I'm also noticing now, kind of looking at this, how you've created this kind of arc of blue, the dark blue pieces of paper that helps to frame this whole area. Kind of creates this rainbow that helps guide us to the focal point, and that's a good thing. That's cool. All right, so well done. I love this image. There's a nice feeling of nostalgia. I like the kind of monochrome of the image, the way you've brought paint and color into the black and white and brought elements of the photograph into the landscape. Good job across the board. Well done. All right, so I'm going to switch over now to this image. Now something going on here. I think this is from one of my students, one of the artists in my class right now. And she originally posted this image without any of these white line drawn elements, these graphic elements on it. And the color palette is nice. The blue brushy next to these kind of red, violet, red orange, kind of those analogous colors on the color wheel. That tension is really nice. The dark, warm colors next to the lighter, cool colors. There's some interesting, just really cool stuff happening just in terms of the color palette. Really nice. I like that she's making these shapes of red Some are horizontal, some are vertical, some are more geometric, some are more irregular and organic. So there's a lot of visual interest and variety happening there. Lots of stuff to enjoy and get involved with. She's helping, the way she's organizing those different visual elements is creating movement through the image. So we've got this kind of square pattern happening with the way that these kind of mid-size pieces are organized, and then obviously this strong vertical and strong horizontal piece. So there's and maybe even it could be said that, you know, there's kind of a circular or spiral type of movement happening, or I don't know, right here, and this kind of goes up here. I don't know. So there's some interesting things just in terms of how you're arranging those red shapes in this field of blue. But then something happened, and you added these white line-drawn graphic elements, like this one down here, which are totally out of left field. I have no idea where those came from. So these these nested circles, and they're kind of cartoony and bulbous. And then this shape coming in from the side that picks up the contour of this red, or, you know, red violet shape, and then these little dots of white on it. So it almost feels like this really abstract, gestural, loose painting was invaded by a cartoon, or these really graphic line-drawn elements. And I think, like I was talking about with the previous image, those are two very different visual languages, right? The line-drawn cartoon next to a very gestural, material, brushy kind of rendering style. Those are two very different languages, and they're gonna clash. And we need to find some way to make them either gel, make sense together, or maybe the clashing is the point, right? This tension between those two visual languages. And honestly, I don't know that I have much more to say about this image than that. I think it became, with the introduction of those more kind of cartoony hand-drawn elements, it became a totally different beast, a totally different kind of image. And I'm intrigued by that. I'd like to see where it's going. It doesn't feel resolved to me yet. But at the same time, you know, I hate to evoke, oh goodness, why am I going to, Philip Guston. I hate to evoke Philip Guston in this context because his subject matter is so distasteful. And he's one of those artists that I think I've talked about before that I love to hate. You know, I'm glad he's there, but he's kind of a dirty character. But in his images, he does combine these cartoony kind of line-drawn images with a very kind of abstract, expressionist type of vocabulary of marks and colors. And before he started adding these cartoony elements, he was completely abstract. So that's what this reminds me of, is there's this kind of tension between these really material, textured, loose, abstract mark-making, brushy brushwork, and then a more cartoony graphic line. So I kind of like that tension, just like I kind of like it in Philip Guston's work. There's this kind of grittiness or irreverence about that, the way this kind of cartoony stuff almost, I don't know, it's almost making fun of or minimizing or making less precious these more brushy, beautiful colors and textures. It's kind of, I don't know. I'm gonna have to, I probably should have thought about that a little bit more. But there's something about that tension that I find a lot of fun and really nice. I don't know if that's kind of the feeling that's intended here. if you want to have those more integrated, what might we do to make that happen? I think you could fill in these areas. So let's take that blue, one of those blues. Let me do this on a separate layer, actually, so I can. So we could take this blue in the background, maybe find a variation of that blue, and then start filling in. And my computer is going to have a hard time keeping up with this stuff. But fill in those some of these shapes that are created by the line drawing with variations of this color palette that you're using in the background. So again, we're kind of tying a visual relationship between these line drawn elements and the brushwork in the background, just by filling those shapes with a related color or an analogous color, or just a different shade or tint of that color. You could just along the same lines, like if I were to bring that red into this line. So now we have a visual connection between what's happening in this line drawn part of the image and what's happening in the background just by relating the color. You could try to break up that line in places so the blue kind of enters in some of those shapes and doesn't feel so disconnected. You've kind of done that right here. You know, there's this break in the white line, and that kind of lets us come into this shape and doesn't feel quite so cut out. Or you could just keep going more with those white lines and just have more of those throughout the image. I'm just going to start making more of these kind of white marks, and there's no rhyme or reason to the way I'm doing this. I'm just trying to introduce those to make a point. But if we have more of those kind of white line drawn graphic elements, they don't feel so anomalous, right? Right now we just have basically these two elements, so they feel like they're kind of like an anomaly in the context of these other marks. You've also helped to kind of unite the two by referring to the background brushwork by following the contour of that shape. So you could do more of that, maybe just bring more lines that, kind of connect the dots of the background following these contour shapes. And that could visually, again, tie together not just the different parts of the composition, but these different visual languages, kind of giving us a way to unite the two, and help us make sense of those two things together in the same composition. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say about it. I think this appeals to my sense of humor. I like that tension between the cartoony and kind of I don't want to say lowbrow, but the informal, the silly, and then this kind of more romantic vocabulary of abstract expressionism and these kind of more brushy, serious kinds of marks. I like that tension between the kind of the attitude of those two different visual styles, and I'm curious to see where you go with it. I think there's plenty of stuff here to play with and experiment with. I'd love to see a whole series of these. There's definitely a lot to explore. All right, so I'm going to switch back. Over to the front camera here. I believe that's all I have for you today. I think both images are a lot of fun. I think there's lots of great things happening in both of these, and I hope you send in, if you do any kind of changes or develop those further, definitely send them in. I'd love to see where they go from here. I have not done this so far in this broadcast, but I think it might be interesting to see or to compare future versions of the images and get kind of a before and after and see how things evolve and change and either get better or possibly get worse, and talk about that. But so that's a possibility for the future. Send future versions in. That could be a lot of fun. And with that, I think that is it for today. I'm going to pop over here to the Facebook and just check in on some comments. And Brenda, he said, I wanted a secret language. Wanted a secret language. I love that. I love that idea. A secret language. Very cool. Want to hear more about that, Brenda? All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. I'll be here 11 a.m. PST. If you have any images you want me to critique, I would like them, but I'd prefer that they be works in progress or current work, recently finished work, rather than older work, just so we can all just enjoy that we're all making work and be inspired by each other. And if you have any questions or anything, any suggestions or any requests, I'd also be happy or entertain the possibility of critiquing other artists. In the past, I did a critique on Degas. If there are any artists in particular that you would find it interesting for me to talk about, I'd be willing to hear that. And if I have any thoughts on the artist, I'd be happy to share those. And I believe that's it. Have a great week, everybody, and be well, be happy, and see you next week. And with that, I am